Okay, so you want me to start? All right. Na zhong sha za. Good morning. I spoke good morning in Hmong, and I'm glad to give a presentation to Crown of Life Congregation about the Wells mission to the Hmong in Vietnam. I gave a presentation to the school children on Thursday. The sound didn't quite work, so we're redoing it here. I'm using the questions that the students sent to me ahead of time to weave in the story of our mission there, and I very much appreciate their questions. First, they asked me about the food over there, and I love the food all over that I could eat in Vietnam. We mainly go to the city of Hanoi, and it has all kinds of Asian cuisine available in Hanoi. We happen to stay in a Japanese neighborhood, so a lot of these pictures you see will be Japanese food. I had more sushi than I've ever had before because that's what was in the neighborhood and I enjoy it. And the prices are very reasonable compared to what we'd pay here in the United States. So we had very nice service. People are very friendly. They speak enough English to get by, and I knew a little bit of Vietnamese. I didn't speak Hmong in this neighborhood, so I could go just about anywhere. They also had a lot of ramen places, really good, excellent ramen, and it was fun to explore. I'd go down a street, down an alley, and there I'd find another restaurant and just try it out because I like to explore things. And I had all kinds of different food, like the one dish to the left is from a Singapore restaurant. It had featured chicken, and in the dish is some chicken feet and chicken joints, which I had never had before. And I've had other parts of the chicken that I don't want to mention at different places. And then I had more pork belly on this than I've ever had in my life, but it's pork belly is enjoyable. I mean, it's like having bacon, another form of bacon, and who doesn't like that? They also have, because there's a lot of embassies in this neighborhood, fancier restaurants. So we went to an Italian restaurant. I had mushroom soup there. Went to a Thai restaurant, and that was at a different Thai restaurant where we had basically raw shrimp. And if you can look at the picture close enough, they always serve the shrimp with the head there. And on my first visit, I thought, well, if that's what you serve, I'll eat it. And I didn't feel so well after eating the shrimp head. So after that, I skipped the shrimp head and went to another fancy place. I had duck. And then this was at a vegetarian Thai restaurant. There aren't a lot of vegetarian places there, but some people like it. And it's very healthy food. I just felt very well after that. Now I can move on to Hmong food. When we took a trip up to the northern part of the country called Sapa. If any of you have visited Vietnam, quite likely you went up to Sapa, such a beautiful area, tourist area. And there we had feasts like this, Hmong feasts, where it's on a big circle and like a dim sum restaurant, and you just spin it around and pick your fish or chicken, rice, vegetables, whatever you want. This is more of that. You can see the pumpkin soup there inside a pumpkin. And then we had a Hmong meal at the home of one of the pastors after doing some filming for the Wells Connection and other things. And his wife had prepared this feast for us of pork and rice and vegetables. And we all sat around, including our Synod president, and Sean Young, Mission Operations, Larry Schlomer, World Missions, and Brian Urbanach, who does the filming for the Wells Connection. And other times we'd have some snacks, fruit, dragon fruit, passion fruit. I did not try stink fruit. I should have, really, because it was in season and they were doing it. Just to say I tried stink fruit, I didn't. Maybe next time. And then when we had the graduation ceremony over the weekend in Hanoi at the hotel, we had a lot of wonderful meals, all kinds of things that were available for that. We had one meal at this restaurant on the roof in kind of the tourist area of Hanoi, and the sun was coming down, could see the city beyond, very beautiful. And then coffee. I'm a true coffee snob from the Pacific Northwest, so I sought out the best coffee I could find, and then I'd go to my favorite places every day and have coffee. What about Vietnamese food, or what do people typically eat there? Well, they eat a lot of meat. That's why I said it's kind of rare to find a vegetarian restaurant. And a lot of pork, and the basic dishes are bun cha, which is kind of a barbecued pork with rice noodles in a broth. Pho, which you probably have here in the Twin Cities, you have pho restaurants. And bun chang, which at this place it featured bun chang, and that's what we ordered. I was there with a Jew who served as my interpreter for the classes that time, interpreting from English into Hmong. And so the bowl is the bun chang. And then I was walking the street one day, and there were a bunch of vendors selling eggs. You can see quail eggs there. I didn't get those because they'd been out in the sun, and I wasn't going to do that. Maybe you've had banh mi, which comes from the French influence in Vietnam. When it was French Indochina, they taught the people to make delicious French breads and such, and then the inside they put meat and pickled vegetables and other things, and you can buy them on the street or in restaurants. Very reasonably priced too, very delicious. And then they kind of consider the national food as pho, which is made in this broth, bone broth, that generally takes about a day to get ready. And then you add the rice noodles and vegetables and the cilantro and jalapeno, whatever you want to put in there. And yes, I have to learn how to use chopsticks. I'm getting better at it, but it's a challenge for most of us who haven't grown up using chopsticks. And then what they call Vietnamese coffee, which I have to explain more about it, but basically they like really sweet stuff. So it's some strong Robusta coffee with sweetened condensed milk and sugar. I don't like that kind of coffee. I just like black coffee, Arabica. And then they have this thing called egg coffee, which you see in the one picture, where they kind of cook an egg with the coffee, makes a full breakfast. I didn't have that either. Maybe I'll try it sometime. The students wondered, when Hmong people don't believe in Jesus Christ and don't know him as the Savior of the world, what do they believe? They have a long tradition of spiritualism or spiritism, animism, which we see all over the world. Wherever the gospel has left a nation or people, the devil brings in this belief in many spirits. And it often captures the people and creates traditions, and they stick with it because, our fathers believed this way, and our fathers before that. It's the religion of our ancestors, and very common in Asia and Africa, that you believe all kinds of spirits surround you. You've got spirits in the rocks, in the trees, in the water, and the spirits of your ancestors. And some are good and some are bad, and you're always in this balance of life where you hope that good spirits surround you and bad spirits will go away. But whenever something bad or unfortunate happens to you, you figure a spirit did that to you, or an enemy sent a spirit against you, and you're fighting against those forces. The unique part about the Hmong belief is that they believe every person has multiple spirits, not just one soul, but 8 or 12 of them. And when you have misfortune or illness, it means one or more of your souls has escaped the body, or a demon has stolen it, and you must retrieve that soul from the spirit realm, bring it back into the body to restore your fortune or have good health. And there's a whole elaborate system of beliefs about this. One tradition talks about a man named Shi Yi, and he's called the son of the Father or the son of heaven. And the tradition says that when the supreme God, the creator God, looked at the world below, he saw all the problems and misery, illness and death, and he wanted to help. He loved the world and he wanted to help them. So he sent his son, Shi Yi, with special tools, go down to the earth and help people. So Shi Yi willingly did that, and he used these tools to heal illnesses and bring good fortune and even raise the dead. People loved Shi Yi because he came to rescue them from their misery. Now at this point you say, wow, that sounds like the Christian gospel, right? Like it's a version of that. And true, you can use these kind of stories to then introduce the real story. But here's the twist to this story, is Shi Yi had a wife and a son in the spiritual realm, and a very evil spirit, which we'd say like the devil, came and killed his son while he was away saving the world. So he became so disappointed that upon returning to heaven, he threw all his special tools, which he had used to heal people, back down to the earth. There's more to the story, too, about how he tried to negotiate to get his son back from the dead, but it didn't work. And the final point of the story is that when in the Hmong community, they have people called shamans who have special spiritual powers, and they believe that they draw upon the tools of Shi Yi to bring their healing in the present. And they believe that, Shi Yi was a real thing, and now they have the power of Shi Yi to enter the spirit realm. There are rituals that allow them to enter the spirit realm with a lot of chanting and like the sacrifice of an animal, because there's a belief that as the animal is dying, there's an avenue to enter into the spirit realm. And so they tend to make that death process a little longer if they can. It could be a small problem, could require a chicken, a big problem, a pig, a huge problem, a cow. So there's going to be a sacrifice. Again, there's parallels to the gospel here where you're talking about sacrifice to resolve your problems and such. But they believe that then the shaman, who may look something that can be a man or a woman, does get into the spirit realm and searches till he or she finds the lost soul captured by the demon. And he does not have the power to overcome the demon, but he tries to trick the demon some way. I think the demons aren't real smart. So then after the trickery has occurred, he's captured the soul again and is somehow sucked back into the physical realm and did this process where the soul returned to the body that had caused, the lost soul had caused illness or misfortune of some kind. That's the belief system. Very, very strong in the Hmong community. And even for Hmong who have become Christians, it's such a powerful influence in their families that it's easy to get drawn back. I think you could compare it to, there's probably members of Crown of Life who grew up in the Catholic Church, and then you saw the light and you became Lutheran. And still, there's part of you that still has a Catholic idea, and it's so easy to fall back into that. And that's kind of the way it is for many of the Hmong. They also believe in reincarnation, not quite in the same way that Hindus do. For them, there's kind of no end to it, is that you pass through this life cycle, and the more good you do, the better your next life form becomes. But also your family has a heavy obligation, especially at the time of the funeral, to make sure the journey of the soul goes pleasantly. And it includes this idea that upon death, the primary soul must return to the mother's placenta, which at birth was buried under the home where the birth happened. And if that's done successfully, then the soul has a pleasant journey into the next level of life, the reincarnation that will happen wherever and in whatever. And if you make any mistakes in that and you don't do it quite right, then that spirit of your ancestor is angry and they're going to cause problems for you. So they have to put this tremendous effort into the funeral ceremony, which could last for a week or longer, to get that process right. But again, you can just see this is the devil working on people to keep them away from the truth, to get them locked into this fear and belief in spirits. Some of the superstitions that go along with that include tricking the spirits. So you see this child. Yesterday I went to the Hmong village here and saw this beautiful child like that, and I was careful not to say anything like to the mother, "Oh, what a beautiful baby," because I didn't know if is this a Christian or not. In the tradition Hmong, you would never say that's a beautiful child. You'd say it's ugly. It's the ugliest child I ever saw, because they believe you're then tricking the spirit to avoid stealing the soul of that child. If you say the child is beautiful, then the demon will say, "Oh, well, I want the soul of a beautiful child," and will take it. So you're trying to figure out which superstition, which string around your wrist, or which medallion will keep the evil spirits away. It's really similar to the concept of good and bad luck that a lot of people buy into, whether it's for your football team or your life. If you do this consistently, this will happen. And if you fail to do the ritual, then something bad will happen. The students also wondered about the original beliefs of Vietnam. And if we go, this is going outside the Hmong community, but the Hmong live in Vietnam, so this influences them. And traditionally, the Vietnamese are Buddhist. There is a strain of Catholicism through the French influence, bringing Catholic priests along with them, and Catholic missionaries coming into the country. But really, there's a Vietnamese community here in the Twin Cities, you're likely to find a Buddhist temple somewhere. And then, it's a communist country, and Karl Marx said religion is the opium or opiate of the people. So the communists don't want any religion, any belief. Your belief should be in the state, and your gods basically are your political leaders. So there has been a lot of persecution against religious believers and Christians in the country. Some of that still happens. Officially, their constitution says that they have freedom of religion. And in our work, which always amazes people, how can we have government approval to go to Vietnam and do this? They have opened up things more. As they open up the economy, they've opened up to ideas and to even bringing Christianity in. But we always have an awareness that this may not last. After all, it is a communist country, and persecution happens. How did Christianity enter Vietnam? I mentioned Catholicism, and even though that does not present a pure gospel, there is some gospel when even presenting a crucifix to someone and explaining what Jesus did on the cross. So that does bring Christianity to many of the countries in Asia through the Jesuits and others who did this mission work. And there are many Catholics still in Vietnam. But how did our gospel get there, or a purer form of Christianity with the pure gospel? And that happened bit by bit, because the Hmong had this heavy tradition. They wouldn't call it a religion. It's just a way of life, understanding of spirits. And like the shamans are not like pastors or even counselors. They're just people that have special powers in the spirit realm that can help you. And how did the gospel get there? Well, some evangelical missionaries did get through, especially through the Christian Missionary Alliance, and also radio broadcasts that could go into a communist country without entering the country physically. And so the Christian Missionary Alliance had a radio station in Manila in the Philippines that broadcast in Hmong to the mountains of Vietnam, where just a few people might have a radio, and usually when they tune it in, they hear Vietnamese. But on this broadcast, they heard their own heart language, Hmong, and that attracted them initially. Then they hear these stories about Jesus, and some of it they associate with a Hmong legend called the Mandate of Heaven, by which they believe one day a supreme king will return to the earth and restore the Hmong kingdom they once had in China. And everything will go well for the Hmong people. And they started to associate this with Jesus, so that attracted them to Jesus. Then they wanted to learn more, so they found the Hmong in Vietnam, they are at least bilingual. Some are trilingual or quadrilingual, but they know Hmong and they know Vietnamese. Some also know English and some know some French or other languages. So they found a Vietnamese Bible. They started to read it. They didn't have the Hmong Bible yet. And they kind of learned, have a better idea of Jesus, that he's far beyond this legend of a king that they thought about. And still they have a lot of confusion. They need guidance and help. And along came, pastors, leaders, prophets, whatever you want to call them, missionaries, who have a version of Christianity, and Jesus is there, but they really don't teach grace. The easiest form of Christianity to share is one that has rules, because we all understand rules and laws. And if you say to become a true Christian, you need to wear white clothing every Thursday and eat fish on Saturday, you would do it because you think, I can do that. I can wear white on Thursday and eat fish on Saturday. And that makes me a good Christian. So the tendency is to, and common rules are, you can't smoke and you can't drink, those type of things. And maybe you can't dance and you can't go to the movies, and that will make you a good Christian. But the fact is, it makes you a very poor Christian, because instead of trusting in the grace of God through Jesus Christ, you're trusting in your works. That's the form of Christianity that the Hmong had. A little bit of Jesus and a lot of law, but enough to have congregations and have lay preachers and evangelists who knew a little bit about the Bible, sing hymns, whatever they could find or whatever they composed. And here's a typical church building. And that, out of that grew a group called the Hmong Fellowship Church, out of this kind of law-based Christianity from the Christian Missionary Alliance. And they became frustrated in that they could never get a clear picture of the gospel. And here's one leader, Pastor Ha, and he's one of the elders of the people, and they get together, the elders, and say, what are we going to do? I recommend, let's pray that just one leader would come instead of these many leaders, and he would guide us into the truth. And Pastor Zong, I want you to do that. So Pastor Zong starts searching, and his search included the internet, and he stumbled across a website from Kansas City maintained by Grace Hmong Lutheran Church, a Wells congregation pastored by Bongkeo Lor. And when he played, he heard a presentation of the gospel he'd never heard before, that it's by grace and not by your works. It's not about following these rules, because you'll never accomplish that. It's what Jesus did for you, and he grants this blessing to you by faith. He'd never heard that before. It was kind of like a Martin Luther Tower experience, if you know about that. So he did what he could to contact Bongkeo, and eventually he got in contact and they talked, and he said, Pastor Bongkeo, could you come to Vietnam to teach us this gospel? And he said yes. And Bongkeo, he did this totally on his own, paid his own way over there, and met with the group, about 60 leaders. They rented a building in Hanoi and started classes. And eventually it became such a thing that he needed help and enlisted the help of others from his Nebraska district, including Pastor Bob Smith. And they started to go over regularly, and eventually Wells World Missions had an interest in continuing this work. It seemed like an open door to go into Vietnam to work with the Hmong, and also our Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary Pastoral Studies Institute thought they would like to come in and have a formal curriculum that would train these students to become ordained pastors of the gospel in our fellowship. This is how it happened, about 10 years ago. And to give an example of the transformation, here's Pastor Huava. And he admits before this training happened, he would go to church on Sunday and rebuke people for sinning. And that was the message they got. Oh, I told you last week not to do that, and you did it again. You are such terrible sinners. You better go home and try better, and we'll see what happens next Sunday. He felt miserable. They felt miserable. There was no gospel happening there. Then he learned the grace of God, and he says, I've learned to show compassion to the sinner. I've learned to show Christ to the sinner. And the pastors have also found, as they proclaimed the grace of God, how much more the people respected them. And that's a big part of their honor-shame culture, is having the respect of others. And they had much more respect by preaching the pure gospel than by hammering on the laws and traditions that they had. Well, one of the results of this whole program is this building that you see in the picture, a theological education center just outside Hanoi. We completed the building in January. We dedicated it in July. Sadly, we can't use it yet. We don't have full permission, but we did go over there just recently and have a dedication, including President Trader along with that. So it's all ready to go. As soon as we have permission, we'll start using it. Until that time, we teach everything online, as if all the COVID restrictions we still had in place. And the good news is all those classes continue. We've even added more classes than we had before, even though we can't use a building. Also, we enjoyed just in July, mid-July, the graduation of 55 students. Many of them had started with Bonkeo's first visits over 10 years ago and have taken courses over the years in the Pastoral Studies Institute. They completed all their courses, and we celebrated with a wonderful worship service and ceremony. We gave them stoles and had celebration of what God accomplished there. All right, back to the kids program. They wondered, what's the life for a child there? And I'm just going to speak about the Hmong children, because the Hmong are mainly our subsistence farmers in the northern part of Vietnam. They have lands that belong to their families, a very large extended family, and they grow rice. You often see beautiful pictures of the terraced fields. They grow corn, they grow melons, and all kinds of things, and they have a small number of farm animals, and they may do other things to make some income too. So for a kid, you're growing up on the farm. Anybody in the congregation here who grew up on a farm would kind of understand that life. So you're working like farm kids, as soon as you can, you start working on the farm. They do have schools. They go to school too. And then many of them, as they grow older and they have gifts to get off the farm, that's really their desire. Kind of like the story here in America, is you want to get off the farm and get a college degree and move on with your life, whatever. But they have that life, and also they're Christian families, so they're learning the gospel from their parents and in their congregation. But one thing they don't have yet is a formal Sunday school program. So the students' offerings this year for the school year will go to help start a program of education for the kids in the Hmong congregations that we hope to develop so that they can regularly learn all the Bible stories, which they do learn from the worship service, but not to learn at their level. And so the kids are involved. These are, young teenagers, and they were singing the hymns or leading the hymns, playing the instruments, participating in that way. Oh, what about the kids wondered the buildings that they have there? And it's typical of any place in the world, you build with the materials you have. So if you have plant materials like some of the huts and rough timbers, there is a traditional Hmong house with a central pillar and rooms off of it, and that's one of them there. But if there's a lot of rocks in your area, well, you'd use those. Or my friend here, Pastor Ashua, he took me around the Sapa area, and we stopped here. He said, this is where I was born. And now his uncle lives there. But you can see they didn't even mill those logs. They just took them and kind of stacked them up. It's a pretty warm climate there, so you don't necessarily have to keep everything insulated. And, you know, that's where you live when you're out in the country there. It's whatever you can put together. But in the city, it's more formal process. Typically, they start with a brick and get the initial wall there, and then they put concrete over the brick and then paint it or something like that. And they don't quite follow the OSHA standards there, so you see these guys are wearing sandals, and they're several stories above the street, and they're balancing on bamboo poles. And yeah, I watched them for a while. They took a cigarette break up there, and but you know, eventually it results in a building like this. So in the city, you would live in an apartment in some structure like this. You wouldn't have a lot of space, but you'd be happy. And they're often multi-story buildings like that. And last year, I understand the students helped a project in Indonesia for water. How did they get water? Well, in the city, they do have tap water. And when I went to my favorite coffee shop, I asked the guy, you know, what kind of water? He says, I use tap water. I filter it, but so the tap water was pretty good. But generally, we use a lot of bottled water just so we don't get diseases from using the local water. And they dig wells. The bright pink there, that's pollution. So you don't want that water. And they do have that problem. And where they can put wells in, well, that's much better than going down to the river and gathering water, which some people still have to do that. So it's not quite the same as what. And do they have pets in their homes? Well, you know, in our Western culture, the fact that we can have cats and dogs and other things is a sign of our wealth. Because if you don't have that much wealth, you don't spend money feeding animals. You need that food. So some that, you know, have a little wealth, yes, they do, especially in the city. But on the farms, it would be a farm animal. You'd have a cat to catch the mice and a dog to help you herd the animals or whatever. And so some people wouldn't, but not nearly as common as you would find it here. And yes, especially if, you know, on the farm, the animals go wherever they want, so they can go in the house too. Then the kids wondered, well, what can we do besides our financial gifts to support? And first you have to look at your own context here. You have, in the Twin Cities, the largest concentration of Hmong people in the United States. Not the largest total number. The largest total number is in California, but the largest concentration is right here. You have Manual Lutheran Hmong congregation with Pastor Peng Mua. I'd say get to know your Hmong neighbors and the Hmong people. Go to the Hmong village. I went there yesterday, and yeah, there weren't many white people like me, but anybody's welcome there, and you can make friendships, and the ones that aren't Christian, you could have an opportunity to share the gospel with them. I'd say that's a way to support this, is do your own gospel sharing. Prayers, Jesus promised, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. And God can do imaginably more than we can imagine, and uses our prayers to, yeah, it's a wonderful thing that we can talk to the Almighty God, and He will actually consider what we ask and make His plans according to that. I don't know how that works, but that's an amazing thing, the gift of prayer. Well, let's think about this for our kids here too, that they would consider a position in the gospel ministry so that they could share the gospel with Hmong or others as teachers or as pastors. that's the story. I probably went overtime from what I did for the kids, but if I see some of you on Sunday, I can answer a few more questions. Thank you so much for your support and for the opportunity to tell you about our mission.